Chapter 14, A Helpless Creature. Unfortunately, Carrie wasn't right about Adam Jackson. It was true that his ego had been bruised, but his embarrassment over my rejecting him turned into something uglier. By the time Carrie and I arrived at school, Adam's lies had spread like a brush fire in a drought. The moment I saw the expressions on the faces of the girls like Lorraine, Janet, and Betty, I knew something mean and vicious had been poured into their ears and would soon be poured into mine. As soon as we entered the building, Carrie sensed the negative electricity in the air. He hovered about me like a nervous grizzly bear. Usually when we arrived at school, he would scamper away to join his few friends, but today Carrie lingered at my side while I organized my things at my locker. Nearby, the girls watched us giggling. Other boys walking by held smirks on their faces and twisted their lips as they whispered. I marveled at how completely Carrie could ignore everyone he wanted to. For him, they didn't exist at the moment. He heard no evil and saw no evil. If he looked in their direction, he gazed right through them. "Good morning, Carrie," Betty said as she passed with Lorraine and Janet. "Good morning, Carrie," Lorraine echoed. "Good morning, Carrie," Janet mimicked. Something slippery and ugly was obviously hidden beneath their wide smiles. Carrie didn't respond. He escorted me to my homeroom and was there at the second bell to walk me to my next class. "You don't have to be worried about me," I told Carrie after I found him waiting in the hallway outside my first period classroom. "Oh, I'm not," he fumbled. "I was just nearby and I thought I might as well walk along with you as with anyone." "Thanks a lot," I said, smiling at his clumsy effort to explain his presence. "I mean, I like walking with you. It's just that you're usually too busy." "Yes," he said, grateful for my suggestion. Although he wasn't there after my next period ended, he wasn't far behind in the corridor. It was nice having him look after me. For the moment at least, I felt as if I had a brother. In my classes and in the hallway I passed from room to room, I noticed how the girls kept their distance, and in class, I saw them looking at me, passing notes. But no one said anything. When I entered the cafeteria at lunchtime, however, I found Janet, Lorraine, and Betty waiting anxiously, their eyes sparkling with glee. "You're kind of cozy with Grandpa today," Betty teased immediately. "Any special reason?" She swung her eyes towards her friends. "Cozy? I don't know what you mean," I replied. I stepped toward the counter to get my container of milk, but I caught the way that they traded smiles and glances as they moved behind me in the lunch line. "We heard that you've taken Laura's place in ways more than one," Janet whispered in my ear. It made the hairs on my neck stick up. "What?" I turned to confront them. "You're still carrying her notebook," Lorraine pointed out, "and you wear her clothes. You sleep in her room, use her things," Betty recited. "And whatever she did with Carrie, you're doing," Janet concluded. I felt the blood rush so quickly to my face and cheeks. "Whatever she did with Carrie, what's that supposed to mean?" I demanded. "You know," Betty rolled her eyes. "I don't know because my mind isn't in the gutter. What are you saying? Who told you those things?" "Who else but the eyewitnesses?" Betty said with the firmness of a prosecutor. She nodded toward Adam Jackson, who had come in with his crowd of buddies. He strutted across the cafeteria, his shoulders back, his face full of himself when he glanced my way. I saw a wicked, twisted smile take shape on those perfect lips. "Eyewitness? No sense pretending with us anymore," Lorraine stepping closer to me. "Adam told us what he found the two of you doing on the beach last night." "He did what?" "He said that he was riding in his motorboat and saw the bonfire and pulled up before the two of you had a chance to make it look innocent," Betty detailed. "He told you that?" "Surprised he told?" Janet asked. He described how you begged him not to tell and promised him something good if he didn't, Betty added. Is that what you did back in the coal country? Bribe the boys with your body? Lorraine asked. I tried to speak, but the words choked in my throat. I shook my head instead. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Carrie watching with concern. He looked as if he was about to get up. Panic nailed my feet to the floor, but I knew I had to do something and fast. Otherwise, there would be a terrible scene in front of the whole student body. Those are lies, I finally said. The real truth is he's just angry for me not doing what he wanted to do on the beach last night. Really? Really, Betty quipped. Is that why you and Grandpa are like two peas in a pod today, practically holding hands? If you were any closer, he'd be under your dress. It's disgusting, Janet followed. You're first cousins, aren't you? The Logans gave Cape Cod a bad name, Lorraine declared. The other two nodded. What are you waiting for, Betty said, shifting her eyes towards Carrie. He's waiting for you. The two of you can hold hands under the table or do whatever else you do. The three of them laughed and moved ahead to get their food. The moment they did, the other girls gathered around them to feed on their gossip like chickens in a pen. I felt my heart pounding. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for me to see what I was going to do. Carrie was still watching from the table where he sat with his two friends, an expression of deep concern on his face. I hesitated. If I went with him, all their tongues would surely cluck. And sitting with those two girls today was like putting myself in a Roman Colosseum. They would eat me alive. Aren't you going to sit with him, Janet asked, nodding in Carrie's direction as she carried her tray past me. Teresa was walking by with her friends. I promised Teresa I'd sit with her today, I said loud enough for her to hear. She turned with a look of surprise, but lost it quickly when she saw my expression on my face and the three witches from Macbeth closing in. She waited for me to join her. Thanks, I whispered. I especially don't want to sit with them today. All they do is make fun of Carrie and me, I explained. Oh, she wore a knowing look. When we were at the table, we'd taken out our sandwiches from our bags. I leaned closer to her. Why did you say oh like that? I asked. Did you hear dirty gossip too? There's never a bad day's catch when it comes to dirty gossip around here, she said, especially about Carrie Logan. He and Laura were often the hot topic around here. Why? There are other brothers and sisters here, dozens, she continued, gesturing at the student cafeteria, but none of them behaved as if they had invisible handcuffs tying them together. Anyone will tell you, so it's not like I'm letting a 2-pound lobster out of the trap. If Carrie could have followed her into the girls' room, I think he would have. Wasn't that all just an exaggeration? No. They came to school together. They sat next to each other in every class. They sat with each other at lunchtime. They sat with each other at the library. They left school together. The first time I saw Laura at a school party, she came with Carrie, Teresa added, and even danced with him. She danced with a couple of boys, but she danced with her brother first. Maybe he thought she was too shy and just wanted to make her comfortable. Or maybe he was too shy, I said. There had to be 100 other reasons besides the one they were suggesting. Teresa snorted. Well, she did have a boyfriend, didn't she? I pointed out. She bit into her sandwich and then shook her head. You really are like a stranger in your own family, aren't you? Yes, I admitted. When Laura started to see Robert Royce, it was a comedy show for these gossips. Carrie would sit by himself with those nerdy friends across the cafeteria and glare at Laura and Robert. He plodded through the hallways with his chin down to his ankles. The other boys started teasing him, and he got into a few fights. I looked across the cafeteria at him and saw that he was still staring at me with deep concern. My heart beat triple time. He Had he heard these stories about us? So now that Laura's gone, they just picked up on you, Teresa said. With someone else's help, I added, glaring across the cafeteria at Adam. He was obviously elaborating his lies, gesturing empathetically and nodding in Carrie's direction. They don't ever stop. They'd eat each other to the bone if they could. But Carrie and Laura, Teresa said, they gave them something to chew on. She shook her head again. It was as if they didn't care, as if they thought no one could touch them with their nasty words and looks. I couldn't understand it. Your father works with my uncle and Carrie. What does he think? She pulled back a moment and glared at me instantly. Then she calmed and sat forward again. He doesn't talk about the Logans except to say that they're hardworking people, she remarked, and that's the tone. I don't know which one of them first suggested it, I said, nodding at Janet, Lorraine, and Betty, but they implied that Carrie had something to do with Laura and Robert's accident. They made it sound as if he deliberately put them in harm's way. Some people think that, Teresa said. Do you? She ate for a while and then sighed. Look, I don't exactly hang out with Laura, Logan, or Robert Royce. Laura was always polite and nice to me, and I liked her, but she sat on another side of the world, and I sat on another. Carrie, he sat somewhere in outer space. I'm not swearing for anyone, but I'm not spreading any gossip, so stop asking me all these questions. She paused and turned completely toward me with her back to her friends. Then in a low voice she added, just like the rest of the Bravas here, I mind my own business. What happens in the homes of the rich and famous isn't my concern. My daddy taught me that the best way to stay out of trouble. Now, don't go telling anyone I said anything else either, she warned with cold ebony eyes. I wouldn't do that. Good. Teresa turned back to her food. I barely touched mine. Was no one on our side? I gazed at Carrie again. He looked so lost and lonely. In my put-away heart, I thought it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair what they were saying about him and me, and it had happened to him. I nibbled my sandwich, my stomach feeling like a tight drum. Teresa talked to her friends for a while, then gazed at me. The hard shell that she had formed over herself cracked a bit. Look, it doesn't make sense that Carrie would do something that would hurt Laura just to get Robert Royce, doesn't it? She asked me. No. So don't let them drive you nuts about it. The trouble with them, she said, nodding at Janet, Lorraine, and Betty and their friends, is that they have nothing real in their lives, so they make up soap operas. Maybe I'm not as rich as they are, and I don't live in a nice house, but I'm not anxious to trade places. I smiled. I don't blame you, I said. Her smile widened. Just ignore them. Maybe they'll get bored and start talking about someone else, she suggested. But it wasn't going to be that way for a while, and they were just getting started, building their fire of pain. While Teresa and I spoke, neither of us had noticed that notes were being passed from table to table in the cafeteria. And each table they reached, everyone quickly stopped talking and leaned in to read the slander. Soon, the girls at Teresa's table grew anxious, and one of them got a hold of one of the notes. She read it and passed it down to Teresa. Printed on the slip of paper was incest is best. Just ask Carrie and Melody. I felt as if my lower body had evaporated. I had no legs. I would never be able to get up from the table. The cafeteria was buzzing with loud chatter and laughter. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I could hear it drumming over the noise. Bitches, Teresa muttered. Her friends nodded. Again, everyone's eyes were on me. I shifted my gaze slowly toward Carrie. Someone had tossed one of the notes over to his table. and he read it and crumpled it up in his fist and turned to me. I shook my head to say, "Don't pay any attention, ignore it." But I could see he was fuming. "Carrie," I called, and he stood up. His gaze was fixed on Adam Jackson across the cafeteria. "Oh no," I muttered. "Don't get in his way," Teresa warned me. "I've seen him pull up a full 10-pounders in a net, and it was nothing more than balloons." "That's just what they want," I wailed. Carrie, determined to strut across the room and silence the cafeteria. The lines in his face were taut, and his shoulders were raised. One of the teacher monitors, Mr. Pepper, looked up from the newspaper curiously as Carrie rushed past him. I got up and Carrie rounded the table beside Adam Jackson. Adam sat there smirking with his arms folded over his chest. "Careful," Teresa said, touching my arm. I stared after him. "You spread a bunch of filthy lies about us today, didn't you?" Carrie accused, in a loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hey, if you're embarrassed by the truth, don't blame me," Adam said. "What's going on here?" Mr. Pepper called, and he moved slower than I thought. He'd make a turtle look like a cheetah. Carrie didn't waste words. His whole body had turned into a fist. It was that tight. He reached across the table and grabbed Adam by his collar and literally lifted him from his seat and pulled him over the table, knocking trays of food everywhere. Adam struggled to break free of Carrie's grip, but it was firm and as rigid as a lockjaw. Adam looked like a fish out of the water, twisting and turning and flailing about, kicking up his feet and swinging his arms wildly. Carrie turned him over and pinned his arms to the table. Everyone drew back. Mr. Pepper finally got some steam and reached over the table shouting, "Stop at this instant, Carrie Logan, stop." Carrie ignored him, his gaze down at Adam's terrified face. "Tell them the truth. Tell them," he screamed. "Was there nothing between me and Melody? Was there?" Carrie Logan let him go. Mr. Pepper cried, but he didn't touch Carrie. It was as if Carrie were on fire, and Mr. Pepper knew he'd burn his hands. "Go get the principal," he shouted at one of the nearby students, who reluctantly turned, disappointed that he'd missed the action. "The truth," Carrie screamed down at Adam and raised his fist to his face. To Adam, it must have looked as if a sledgehammer were about to fall on his precious, handsome visage. "All right, nothing happened. Nothing happened. I made it all up. Satisfied?" Carrie relaxed, and Adam sat up quickly. Now indignant and embarrassed, he started to say something, but when Carrie turned back to him, he shrank quickly. "Mr. Logan, you march yourself right down to the principal's office this minute, you hear?" Mr. Pepper said. Carrie didn't acknowledge him. He looked at me. "You all right?" he asked. I wasn't sure if I had breath in my lungs, and I nodded, reserving my words. "If anyone else bothers you, tell me later," he said loudly. Then, moving like a prisoner condemned to the gallows, he marched ahead of Mr. Pepper toward the door. The moment he left, the cafeteria burst into a storm of chatter. "Satisfied with yourselves now?" I asked Janet, Lorraine, and Betty as I reached their table on the way back to Teresa's. They were too frightened to reply. "Adam Jackson invited me to meet him at the beach last night. I made the mistake of doing so, and he tried to rape me," I told them. Their eyes bulged. "He talked me into drinking vodka and cranberry juice and got me drunk." I saw from Janet's expression that she believed me. Maybe she had a similar experience. Carrie arrived just in time and drove Adam away. "He literally tore him off me," I told them. "This is the revenge that you and your mean gossip helped him. Now Carrie is in bad trouble. Thanks a lot." I turned on my heel and went back to Teresa. "That Adam Jackson better watch his step, or Carrie's gonna make him fish bait," she said. "He'll only get himself into more trouble, and it's all my fault," I wailed. I plopped into my seat just as the bell rang. The sea of chatter flowed out of the cafeteria with the students. The teachers in the afternoon classes would have a hard time keeping their attention today, I thought. I waited until most everyone was out before getting up to follow. Teresa lingered behind me. What will they do to him? Probably suspend him, she said. I felt just dreadful. I sat half dead in my seat in all my classes, barely listening, never answering questions. I couldn't wait for the day to end, and when it did, I found Carrie waiting for me outside, his hands in his pockets and his head down, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. The moment he saw me, he perked up. You all right? He asked quickly. Yes, but what happened? I got 2 days vacation, he said. Oh, Carrie, near the end of the year when you need review for your test, that's horrible. It doesn't matter, he said. Yes, it does. I'm not going to let that principal do this to you. It's not fair. He should see those nasty notes that were passed around. He saw them. It didn't make any difference. He told me I don't have the right to lose my temper and take things into my own hands. He's right, I said. I told him it hadn't happened to his family, so he couldn't say that. What did he say? I asked, shocked at his courage. He shuddered a bit and said that wasn't the point. But don't worry, I'll walk you to school anyway, before and afterward, and if Adam Jackson or anyone bothers you, I won't tell you, I said. You'd turn them into fish bait, I declared, using Teresa's language. He nodded, pleased with the description. Exactly, and they know it. We started away. I appreciate you protecting me, Carrie, but I hate to see you in trouble. I saw a smile take form on his lips. How can you be happy? I asked him. This is the way it used to be between me and Laura, he said softly. Then he lost his smile until Robert stepped into her life. I said nothing. We walked on, each chased by troubled thoughts. Carrie didn't have to tell Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jacob what happened at school. The principal called and told Aunt Sarah before we returned home. Uncle Jacob was still down at the dock and didn't know yet. However, Aunt Sarah was visibly shaken just at the thought of what she had found out. She wrung her hands and shook her head in despair. Don't worry, Ma, I'll tell them myself. I'll go down to the dock now, Carrie said. How did this happen, Carrie? You haven't been in any trouble for a long time, and it's so close to graduation. I was about to take the blame, but Carrie spoke first. This boy was saying ugly, disgusting things about us and our family around the school, Ma. I did what I had to. Why was he doing that? Because he's a shark who needs to be harpooned, and that's all there is to say. Carrie glared at me with the eyes of warning. Oh, Melanie, was it dreadful for you too? Yes, Aunt Sarah, I'm sorry Carrie's in trouble, but the other boy was at fault. She sighed. Well, what are we going to do? All this happens on the day we're going over to the grandparents for dinner. Don't mention anything about it to them, she told us fearfully. I won't if you won't, Carrie promised. He winked at me and went upstairs to change his clothes. May, who had learned only bits and pieces about everything, was desperate to know what caused all the commotion. Neither Carrie nor I had told her much on the way home, since neither of us was in the mood to talk. I explained to her the best that I could, leaving out the nasty details of the rumors. She signed back that she was sorry Carrie was in trouble again. It had always made Laura sad and made her sadder still, she said. In her large shadowed brown eyes lingered more dark secrets and suffering than a child her age should know, I thought. And with her handicap, most of them remained trapped in her heart. Go up and try on your dress for tonight, Aunt Sarah told me in a tired, defeated voice. We have to do our best under the circumstances. Yes, Aunt Sarah. She followed me upstairs. The dress hung with a slip on the closet door. On the floor beneath them was a brand new pair of shoes she had bought to match the dress, since Laura's shoes wouldn't fit me. Aunt Sarah, you shouldn't have done that. I could have worn something that would match with my own shoes. No, This was the last dress I made for Laura, she explained, and she never got a chance to wear it. Oh, I looked at the dress with different eyes. It took on a strangely spiritual feel, like a dress of a ghost. It was ankle length, straight beige silk dress with a Victorian collar and had a lace neck. Besides, Aunt Sarah said, we're all going to dress with a little extra care tonight. Olivia and Samuel are having Judge Childs as their guest. She called especially to tell me that we have to look our best. He was the state Supreme Court judge, you know. He's retired now, but maybe you've heard of his son, the artist Kenneth Childs. No, I shook my head and stared at the dress. I could almost see Laura in it. I just thought you might have, because you've been here a while and he's one of the most prominent sculptors. His work is in the Providencetown Artists Museum, and it's in all the good galleries. I shook my head. The Childs have always been good friends with Olivia and Samuel. Kenneth practically grew up with Chester and Jacob. He was at their house so much. Judge Child's wife died 2 years ago. His other sons and daughter are alive in Boston. Kenneth's brother and sister don't have much to do with him, but Kenneth was the judge's favorite, even though he didn't do anything with a law degree. The judge and his wife gave him enough money to do his art. They supported him for quite a while, and there were some hard feelings in the family because of it. Jealousy, I imagine. She sighed deeply. Every family has its hardships. I wanted you to know a little about it so you don't say anything out of place if the judge asks you a question. Why are we always on pins and needles when we go to grandparents' house, Aunt Sarah? I asked. It seemed to me the time spent with the family should be the most relaxing time of all. Oh, we're not on pins and needles. We're just trying to do the right thing, say the right thing, look right. It's what Grandma Olivia wants, I provided. I'm surprised she has any friends at all. But she does. She has many friends, and they all come from the best society. That doesn't always mean that they're best friends to have, Aunt Sarah. She smiled as if I had said something only the most inexperienced young person might utter. Go on, dear, try on your dress. I want to be sure it fits and there's no need for altercations, she urged. Betty, Lorraine, and Janet's words haunted me as I took the dress down and began to take off my clothes. We heard you're taking Laura's place in more ways than one. But what else could I do? I had nothing nicer than this to wear. Of course, none of my other clothes had arrived. The dress felt a little snug in the bosom, but other than that, it was perfect. I think we can get by with this as it is, Aunt Sarah said, scrutinizing me. How does it feel? It's fine, Aunt Sarah. Good. And the shoes? They're fine, I said. Then you're all set. I'll see to May. We're leaving at about 5, she told me. She left and I stood there gazing at myself in the mirror. It was a nice dress, beautiful in fact. And at any other time, under any other circumstances, I would be happy to wear it. But right now it seemed as if I were wearing a shroud. I couldn't shake the eerie feeling. The more I learned about Laura, the more I touched her things, read her letters, wore her clothes, the more I felt as if I was disturbing her peace and stirring up things better left uncovered, buried at the bottom of the sea along with her and her lover. I was dressed and my hair was brushed and ready. Carrie and Uncle Jacob had yet to return from the dock. May looked very pretty in her pink taffeta dress and matching shoes. She and I sat in the living room waiting a while Aunt Sarah paced in the hallway. Where are they? We have to get ready or we're going to be late. I couldn't help wondering if something terrible happened after Carrie told his father about being suspended. Finally, the door opened and the two entered. Carrie gazed into the living room, then ran upstairs without a word. Uncle Jacob paused and peered in at us. His eyes fixed on me and nodded. I knew it wouldn't take you long to get him in trouble, he said. It wasn't her fault, Jacob, Aunt Sarah responded. It was that nasty Adam Jackson's fault. I warned you, he told her. I warned you what it would be like having Haley's daughter. I shot up as if I were sitting on an anthill. Why do you keep saying that? What's that supposed to mean? I demanded. Ask your mother next time she calls, he asked. He looked at Sarah. I gotta clean up and get dressed. No time for this nonsense now. He started up the stairs. Why does he keep saying that, Aunt Sarah? I have to know what it means. She shook her head, pressing her lips together as if she were afraid the words would escape. I'm not going anywhere until I get some answers, I insisted. Oh dear, oh dear. Why does this have to happen before we go to Olivia and Samuel's? She sat on the sofa and started to cry. May ran to hug her. I felt just terrible as she sobbed, and May stroked her hair lovingly, concerned. You look so beautiful in that dress, too, she wailed. What have we done to deserve this? What have we done? May looked up confused. Hurt tears were building in her soft eyes. All I seemed capable of doing was hurting everyone. All right, Aunt Sarah, I'm sorry. I'll go. She sucked back her tears and dabbed her cheeks with her handkerchief. Then she smiled. It's going to be all right, she said. Once everyone gets to know you better, it will be fine. Look how nice Laura's dress looks on you. That's no coincidence. It's an omen, a good omen. Jacob will realize it too. Fishermen are aware of good and bad omens. You'll see. I just stared. She sighed and patted May's hair. My pretty little seashell, she said, kissing her daughter. She held her to herself and rocked her for a moment. We all deserve some happiness now, dear, don't we? Yes, Aunt Sarah, I answered. Then it was settled. We'll all be happy, she said. It was as if she believed her words themselves could change the world around us. She left to wash her face and straighten her hair. May sat beside me, and we looked at one of her books together. Carrie came down the stairs and stood in the doorway. He was dressed in a blue suit and tie and looked very handsome. You look nice, I said. I feel as if I'm in a straitjacket. He tugged on his shirt collar. I hate wearing a tie. I feel like a fish out of water, I suggested. I'm going outside to wait, he said. It's my favorite time of the day. Okay, we'll come along. I signed to May and she closed her book and followed, taking my hand, and we strolled in front of the house. Just over the western horizon, the sun was a rich saffron color, almost orange. The wispy clouds resembled veils of light on a cotton being across the sky. Terns called over the ocean. The breeze was constant, but warmer than usual. I had to admit, Cape Cod was a beautiful place. How it must have broken my father's heart to leave. Carrie glanced at me, his eyes glimmering, and met mine. Your father's right, you know, I said. It was my fault. Don't start that again, he warned. After school ends, I'm not staying here, I told him. No matter what, I'm leaving. If my mother doesn't want me, I'll go live with Grandma Arlene back in Sewell. I'll get a part-time job and help out. But I can't stay where I'm not wanted. I can only make trouble for people I like, I said. A tiny smile took form on his lips. Summer is the best time of year up here. You can't leave. Besides, I'm depending on you to help during cranberry season. I shook my head. Everyone refused to face reality here, I thought. May suddenly began to tug my hand and gesture towards the beach. What is it, May? I put my hand over my eyes and gazed. Carrie? What are those people gathering down there? Where? He looked. Oh, no, not again, he said, and started over the sand. What is it? We hurried to keep up with him. 1,000 yards or so, a number of people circled something big and dark on the beach. Carrie. It's a beached sperm whale, he called back. He broke into a trot. May and I tried to keep up. Nearly 24 people had already reached the pathetic creature. at least 50 foot long. It lay on its side, with one visible eye open, bulging. It was a gigantic and powerful looking, but right now it was helpless, dying. Most of the people, tourists who had come to see, were timid and remained a dozen feet or so away. And some teenagers demonstrated their bravado by rushing to it and slapping their hands on its body. Carrie drew closer, keeping far enough to prevent his shiny good shoes from getting wet. I drew closer with May. What happened? It beached itself, he said. Why? Lots of theories about that. Some think it's because they're ill and they seem to know that coming to shore will help them die. Does it look sick? I don't know. What other reason might a whale have for doing this? I asked. Whales have a built-in sonar system which navigate in the deep water. Sometimes when they're in the water, only 100 or 200 feet deep, it disturbs their sonar and the whales get echoes and become confused and they end up beached. What's going to happen? Can it swim? I asked. The problem is that when they reach land like this, their weight is so great that it crushes their lungs and hampers their breathing so much that they become overheated and die. It looks as if that's what's happening here. Oh, Carrie, isn't there anything we can do? You think we can push it back into the sea, he said. And even if we do get him back into the water, he'll probably wash up again down shore. Anybody send for the Coast Guard? He asked the crowd. Somebody said something about that, a tall man replied. If they come, they might try to do something. If they don't show up soon. What? He gazed around. The kids were still tormenting the whale and slapping it and gazing into its eyes and threatening to poke its eye out. Stop it, I screamed. They paused for a moment, saw it was only me, and continued their pranks. That's not so bad, Carrie said. People sometimes come down at night and start to cut off pieces while the whale is still alive, he explained angrily. Oh no, Carrie. We heard a car horn honk. Uncle Jacob and Aunt Sarah pulled up from the road, gesturing. We gotta go, he said. This is horrible, Carrie. He sighed. I know, he said, turning away. Carrie, we'll come back later, after we return from Grandma's, he promised. He stared at the whale for a moment more and shook his head. Not that we can do anything. Come on, he urged. I followed, but after a few steps I looked back at the helpless giant creature that had somehow found himself trapped on this beach. He was probably too confused and stunned to realize what happened and what was soon going to happen. Just like me, I thought, walking slowly behind Carrie and gazing back. A few moments. Beached.